Welcome to Week 8, Part 2 of South and Southeast Asia after 1200. Hindu art after 1200. The origins of Hinduism date back to the ancient Vedic era. The Vedas, Upanishads, and the Puranas outline rituals and sacred stories important to Hindu philosophy and belief. Despite or perhaps because of the number of scriptures, Hinduism was and remains a haven of debate, logic, and argumentation among its often highly philosophical followers. Hinduism centers around four major deities: Vishnu, Shiva, Devi, the goddess, and Brahma, which are all manifestations of the infinite, the Brahman. As is the case for many polytheistic religions the world over, Hindu deities have many guises, aspects, or personalities. Devotions to deities can be ritualized or achieved through ceremonial devotions, or through bhakti, a practice that attempts to create a personal relationship with the deity. Images of the deity, such as the Shiva Nataraja, provide the darshana or vision of a deity which assists in bhakti. Like followers of Buddhism and Jainism, members of the Bhakti movement of late medieval India were largely anti-caste. All of the deities were popular throughout the regions of India, but it seems that there are many temple complexes dedicated to Shiva that remain standing. The temple of Meenakshi Sundareswarar is dedicated to Shiva and his consort Parvati. The gopuras, tall structure covered in figure relief sculpture, serve as gates to the complex. Gopuras resemble the tower-like shape of the vimanas and shakaras of the ancient Hindu temples of the early medieval period. The late medieval period in India marks the beginning of the Islamic Mughal Empire. Although Hindus were allowed to practice, their temples were sometimes destroyed and the stone used for Islamic structures. However, Hindu temples were built, especially in the south during the Mughal period. The Mughal rulers even sometimes commissioned Hindu temples. In general, most Mughal emperors made attempts to synthesize Islam and native indigenous Indian culture. The Mughal period in India. From 1206 on, the northern regions of India were ruled in part by Islamic Turkish leaders. By 1658, one dynasty of sultans, the Mughal dynasty, had unified the subcontinent under a single emperor. During this period of unification, India was ruled by sultans with ideals that were egalitarian and anti-caste. However, the Mughals seemed to simply ignore caste in making decisions, rather than actively trying to eliminate the system. Like all other Muslim rulers throughout Asia and Africa, the Mughal built Islamic structures in India. The Buland Dwarza, or the Great Gate, was built in 1573 to commemorate the Mughal Emperor Akbar's conquest in the region. The gate is significant for its combination of Islamic and indigenous Indian architectural elements. An Islamic pointed arch provides an entry to the gate, while the gate is topped by Indian chhatris, little octagonal pavilions. But probably presently the most famous work of architecture in India is the Taj Mahal. Mughal art and architecture would synthesize the characteristics of many cultures into a syncretic style. The Taj Mahal is a tomb commissioned by Shah Jahan for his wife Mumtaz Mahal. It follows many Islamic architectural traditions, including the arched entryways or iwans, the onion-shaped domes, and the towers or minarets, which there are four, which you would normally find at a mosque. The beautiful garden is meant to represent the Islamic paradise of the afterlife, but it also incorporates that chhatri, which you can see here, and follows a more monochromatic color scheme than usually found in Islamic interior decoration. Sikhism was a form of Indian Islam that combined bhakti with Sufism. Sufism, a mystical form of Islam, seemed compatible with bhakti practice. Sikhism has many followers that gather at shrines throughout India dedicated to a variety of Sikh saints. Mughal period painting includes images from the lives of Mughal leaders. Books like the Jahangirnama and Akbarnama told stories of the emperor's exploits. In these paintings, we have examples of relatively rare figural Islamic art. This can be attributed to both the influence of highly figurative native Indian art as well as influence from the West. In fact, Mughal rulers hired Persian painters, and their cosmopolitan courts may have included Flemish painters. Although the emperor was an ineffective ruler and a drug and alcohol addict, the artist presents Jahangir as a learned, wise, and worldly individual. In Jahangir preferring a Sufi sheikh to kings, Shah Jahan is shown in a very benevolent fashion with a large gold halo and shown preferring ascetic and humble religious leaders over more prestigious ones. It's interesting because you guys can also see a very Flemish looking person in the foreground here. Shah Jahan is also shown in a similar fashion in Shah Jahan on horseback. It could be argued that his reign was much more deserving of praise. Shah Jahan was deposed by his son Aurangzeb, who, unlike his predecessors, was a hardliner and religious conservative. Aurangzeb stretched the Mughal Empire to its greatest length, but it would decline soon after. In Mughal manuscript illumination, realistic spatial depth and facial features are tempered by the artist's interest in surface pattern. For example, in Hamza's spy scaled fortress. The emphasis on the surface detail gives these miniatures a rich decorative quality reminiscent of earlier Islamic art from the Middle East. On the other hand, Rajput-style painting of Hindu subjects like the Gita Govinda often looks back to earlier, more lyrical quality of Indian art, especially evidenced by the Jain paintings of Part 1. Other Hindu manuscript pages, like the Hour of Cow Dust and Rama and Sita, reflect the colorful, more realistic influence of Mughal style. Let's talk about modern India. In the 1600s, the British East India Company, a merchant trade corporation based out of England, became friendly with Mughal rulers. The company grew in power, using a paramilitary force to ensure a monopoly in trade out of India. Indian people worked to create products for the company to purchase and trade. As it expanded, the British East India Company often met with local resistance, which was quelled with military force. The situation was enormously enriching for England, but not for the vast majority of people in India. In fact, the power inequity led to mass poverty as Indians were forced to work making objects for trade instead of farming. Several famines in the 18th and 19th centuries led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Eventually, the British East India Company became the de facto ruler of India, with the Mughal rulers acting as ineffective figureheads. In 1858, the power over the country was officially transferred to Queen Victoria, who was later declared Empress of India. India was ruled by British until independence and partition in 1947. During this colonial period, British culture was imposed upon Indian culture in a highly strategic way. British lawyers sought to end the caste system, but the East India Company exploited the system in order to divide and conquer the continent. British philosophers attempted to create a new upper class of India, whose values and ideas were more British than Indian. This movement is evident in art. Indian artists used a form of representation similar to Royal Academy history painting. Taj Mahal by Sita Ram is criticized for its objectification of the artist's own culture. The painting presents the Taj Mahal as if it is a ruin emerging from a lush primeval jungle, which could not be further from the truth. Independence and partition. Not all artists accepted this colonial perspective of India. Bharat Mata by Abhendra Tagore presents a strong icon of Mother India as a combination of goddess imagery and other Hindu symbols. Tagore's Mata is representative of the Swadeshi movement of the early 20th century. The Swadeshi movement sought independence from Britain. Swadeshi means self-sufficiency. This movement anticipated the Swaraj or self-rule movement of Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi practiced civil disobedience and nonviolence. Though he was of a higher varna, he wore very simple clothing and lived a very ascetic lifestyle. Gandhi and B.R. Ambedkar are credited with winning independence from Great Britain in 1947. But Ambedkar and Gandhi were quite different. Ambedkar was an untouchable who, like Gandhi, studied in the West and became a lawyer. Ambedkar wrote a large portion of the Indian constitution, which created a democratic state of India, also known as Hindustan. He advocated for the abolishment of the caste and the status untouchability. Ambedkar was part of the Dalit movement. Dal means lentils, a food that is often ground or crushed and added to food. Untouchables call themselves Dalit as they are considered themselves to be crushed by higher castes of society. This moniker was intended to be defiant, and Ambedkar's rebellious Dalits were in stark contrast to Gandhi's mild children of God. With independence came partition. It was believed by many in power, Indian and British, that India would not be able to survive without partition into Hindu and Muslim states. This was debated, but finally the lines were drawn with Hindustan and India in the center, and Pakistan, with borders like we now know them, to the west, and East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. It's believed that millions were killed in migrations across India to or from Pakistan. While the caste system was outlawed by India's constitution in 1947, and people can technically work in whatever capacity they please, Indians are still aware of caste. Even with affirmative action, people whose names reveal them to be of lower caste are discriminated against in Indian society. While a person whose family belongs to a higher caste may tell you caste no longer matters in India, those who belong to lower or untouchable castes will tell you that it does still matter. You can read more about India in the resources provided. That wraps up this week on South and Southeast Asian art. Next week, week 9 presents the art of China and Japan.